I was discovered by Mr. Siano, who invited me to join this present profession that I'm in. So I do understand the motivation for service and the motivation for serving mankind in a voluntary way. The importance of voluntary service cannot be underestimated in the development of any society. In fact, I am of the view that without voluntary service and voluntarism in general, that societies will not develop. Indeed, the measure of development of a society is the extent to which its citizens give back, even outside of formal structures of the society. So, I want to, as I said, congratulate the Kiwanis movement in Jamaica and to encourage you to continue giving. I've had the perspective of government. I've had the perspective of working in the bureaucracy of government. And I will say this to you, that government cannot address all the needs of its citizens. That is a statement of fact. So government has to be very well defined in itself and in its role as to what it will do. And Lieutenant Governor, I believe it was you who said that if you teach a man to fish, it is far more effective than giving him a fish. And that is something that is said all the time to me in politics. When I go into my constituents say, boy, Mr. Holness, I don't want to have to come to you all the time for helping them. So help me out this one time, but you also have to teach me to fish. But what I've discovered is that if there are not many fish in the sea, you still have a major problem. So the function and role of government is not just only to help in the development of our human resources such that they are independent and not part of a clientelistic system, that they can survive, but government also has a very important role to make sure that the sea is profitable, that the sea is fruitful, that you can reap. And I'm using that kind of analogy, that kind of metaphoric presentation to say that government ought to focus specifically on ensuring that yes, we develop human resources, but we must also at the same time ensure that we develop our economy. Government has to define its role very carefully. And in developing our human resources and developing our economy, government must also look very carefully at the question of equity. Who are the persons who are being left out of our society? Who are the most vulnerable? Where are those special groups that need special attention? And how do we address those groups? And in Jamaica, we don't necessarily have a well-defined and articulated policy about dealing with the vulnerable in our society. Let me give you one. When I was Minister of Education, a case came to my attention of a child who was denied a place in school because that child had a form of disability that made it physically impossible for the child to be integrated in the school community. And that child was being constantly denied. Many of you would have seen the case on television. And it's not that the ministry did not have a policy that every child must learn, every child can learn, and every child must be in school. But how the policy was executed and enforced left much to be desired, because the agents of the ministry operating in their local departments in the schools were making decisions based upon the resources that they faced. So they were effectively saying, though the ministry is saying one thing, the government is saying one thing, on the ground I can't provide the service to accommodate this child who has a particular disability. Then we see on the front page of the Observer the challenge that parents are facing with autistic children. You don't have to think much harder than that to see all the groups in the society that need specialized care and attention. They form the most vulnerable in our society. In fact, for my just about 15 years in politics, representing an inner city constituency, I have become very sensitized to the vulnerable and the poor, because they form in Jamaica a significant mass of the population. In fact, the driving force of politics in Jamaica is this loose term called the poor. It's interesting to watch American politics, where the discourse is about expanding the middle class. In Jamaica, the discourse is about how do we treat with the poor and vulnerable. A special discussion has to be had with that loose term that describes the mass of our society. Because much of the values and behaviors and attitudes are antithetical to development. And if we are not brave as leaders to have that discussion and to engage that mass of our society, we will continue to be trapped in the cycle of no growth and low achievement in terms of the development agenda. But I'm not here today to carry you into an intricate discussion about the politics of poverty. What I want to say to the Kiwanis movement in Jamaica is that there are some services that need to be provided by the state that the state is not in a position to provide, and the truth is may not be the best agency for providing those services. And what needs to happen is the development of a specific policy of public-private, but in this case, government and voluntary service, a policy that defines how voluntary services relate with government. One such area is in the provision of what I would like to call care and protection services for children who are either without parents or have fallen into the need for care and protection under the law. We find that state-run homes do not necessarily provide the level of personal care and attention that these children need. And it could very well become a policy of the government to contract out those facilities they already own. And instead of them directly running, take that budget under a policy, under a framework, and provide the funding to persons who genuinely want to volunteer, genuinely want to give, whether it is the church, the Kiwanis movement, whatever, so that they provide the service. And I see that right across the board in almost all those services that require specialized care. In the Ministry of Education, we advance that in a significant way. We recognize that the Ministry of Education, with a bureaucracy that is as huge and hard to maneuver as it is, could not provide that personal care that was necessary for, let us say, an autistic child, or for a child that suffers any form of the spectrum of learning disorders. That requires personal attention, personal care, specialized environment. And what we did was to support those persons who wanted to give, who wanted to work, so that they could provide the service. That's something that we are looking at very closely in the political organization that I represent, because it is, to me, the best way to make the volunteerism that is such, part of the beauty of being Jamaican, part of the fabric of Jamaica, volunteerism, to leverage that towards the provision of services for the most vulnerable in our society. So, these are my views, and once again, I thank you for allowing me the platform and the opportunity for sharing with you.
I'm going to take the opportunity, if there's any burning questions that my fellow brothers and sisters will be asking the leader of the opposition, Andrew Holness. This is the perfect opportunity now. Any questions any burning questions? Any burning questions? Yes, President Norris.
That we have to break down the stupid division that we have.